You know, folks, when you've been standing on sand that's trying to swallow your boots for 18 months and the only thing keeping you alive is the forepaws of a four-legged partner, the bond you build isn't just strong. It's the whole damn foundation. It's the air you breathe. My name is Jake, and the partner I'm talking about was Ruger. He was a mix, mostly German Shepherd, a good chunk of Belgian Malinois, built like a tank, smart as a whip, and honestly, he probably saved my life more times than my guardian angel ever clocked in for. He was an MWD, a military working dog, and we did our time together. We were a team, the kind where you didn't even need hand signals anymore. We just knew what the other was thinking. When our tour was finally up, and we got the word that Ruger was retiring due to a little hip trouble he'd picked up, nothing major, just enough to disqualify him from active duty, I didn't even hesitate. The paperwork was filled out before the plane touched down in Fort Bragg. He was mine. He was coming home to Fayetteville, North Carolina, with me. That day, the day we drove home, was supposed to be perfect. I had my fiancée, Sarah, waiting. The house was quiet, smelled like pine needles and clean laundry instead of diesel and dust. It was everything we'd fought for. I opened the back door of the pickup, and Ruger hopped out. He was officially a civilian now. No vest, no leash clip, just a big, happy, panting dog ready for the good life. He sniffed the grass, rolled around a little, and then followed me inside. Sarah was ecstatic, showering him with praise and belly rubs, the kind of attention he hadn't seen since basic training. For about 20 minutes, it was exactly the scene I'd pictured during those endless, sweaty nights overseas. Then, he stopped. We were in the main downstairs hallway. If you walk through our front door, you hit the living room, and then there's a short hallway that connects the living area to the kitchen and the dining room. Right there, where the worn edge of the area rug meets the hardwood floor, is where the stairs go up to the second story. It's a good spot. It's a traffic choke point. And Ruger planted himself right in the middle of it. He didn't lie down. Not at first. He just stood there, head held low, ears scanning, his tail perfectly still. He looked like he was waiting for a command that wasn't coming. "Hey, buddy," I said, snapping my fingers and walking toward the kitchen, where I'd laid out his brand-new, expensive orthopedic dog bed. "Come on, bedtime." He didn't move. His eyes tracked me, but his body was rigid. I walked back. I knelt down. "Ruger, what's up? It's safe. We're home." I patted the hardwood floor about 3 feet away from his spot, trying to lure him with a familiar tone. Nothing. He just shifted his weight slightly, settling into a position that looked less like resting and more like guarding. Sarah came over carrying one of the squeaky toys she'd bought, a ridiculous plush squirrel. "Look, Ruger, squirrel." She tossed it gently past him into the dining room. Ruger watched it land, gave a single, almost dismissive puff of air from his nose, and then focused back on the hallway. "Okay," I said, standing up. "Maybe he's just tired. Big day, right?" We left him there. We had dinner. We watched the news. Every time I walked past that hallway, he was in the exact same spot. Sometimes he was sitting, sometimes he was standing, but his focus never wavered. He was facing the living room, looking directly at the main entryway, but he also had a clear sight line to the stairs. That night, when Sarah and I went upstairs, I tried one last time. I actually picked up his new dog bed and dragged it right next to him. "This is your post, huh?" I scratched behind his ears. "Fine, you can sleep here." He watched me place the bed, but he refused to step onto it. He simply lay down on the cold, hard wood next to the bed, curled up tightly, and closed his eyes. I worried, but I figured it was the transition. He'd gone from high-intensity work to absolute stillness in 48 hours. Give him a week, I told myself, and he'll be chasing squirrels and begging for steak like a normal dog. A week passed. Then 2. Ruger didn't move. I mean that, literally. He established a perimeter of about 4 square feet in that hallway, and he would not willingly leave it. If I needed him to go outside, I had to put his leash on, and even then, he'd walk with his head down, clearly stressed, looking like he was abandoning his post. The minute he finished his business, he would sprint back to the door, demanding immediate entry, and rush straight back to his spot. His orthopedic bed sat unused. His water bowl, which I moved into the hallway near him, he drank from sparingly. I started feeding him his kibble right there on the floor, because if I put it in the kitchen, he wouldn't touch it. He'd stare at it, then look back at the living room, like eating wasn't worth the risk of leaving the defensive position. "Jake, this isn't normal transition stress," Sarah said one morning, watching him from the doorway of the kitchen. She was trying to be patient, but she was starting to get nervous. "He's not playing. He's not exploring. He just stands guard." "He's been wired for 2 years, honey," I countered, though my voice lacked conviction. "He's got PTSD. He's looking for the IED, the tripwire. He needs time to decompress." I called the vet. I called the MWD Training Center psychologist. They all said the same thing: patience, routine, gentle encouragement. So I tried everything. I tried ignoring him, hoping he'd get bored and move. He didn't. I tried bribing him. I bought the most expensive, smelly, slow-cooked beef jerky treats I could find. I'd walk into the living room, sit on the couch, and hold a piece up. "Come on, boy, come get the good stuff." He would whine, a low, miserable sound, the only time he made noise, but he wouldn't budge. It was a clear internal struggle. I want the treat, but I cannot leave the perimeter. I even tried dragging him. Don't judge me. I had reached my limit of frustration and worry. I put his leash on, wrapped it around my wrist, and gave a firm pull toward the kitchen, trying to get him to come eat his breakfast. He resisted with all his 85 pounds. He dug his claws into the hardwood, and when I pulled harder, he let out a short, sharp yelp of distress. Not pain, but pure anxiety. That yelp stopped me cold. That wasn't my Ruger. My Ruger took orders. My Ruger trusted me completely. This was a dog who believed he was actively failing a critical, life-or-death mission. I knelt down again and hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry. Buddy, I'm sorry. Stay. Stay right here if you need to." And he stayed. The house started to feel less like a home and more like a forward operating base where one of the sentries was permanently stuck on duty. Sarah and I had to walk around him constantly. If we came down the stairs, we had to step over him. If we went to the kitchen, we had to navigate around his rigid form. He was always there, a furry, silent obstacle. It got weirder when my old platoon buddy, Mike, came over. Mike had handled K9s too, though his dog, Axel, retired before ours did. Mike was used to the hypervigilance, but even he was thrown off by Ruger's absolute immobility. "Dude, he's like a statue," Mike observed, leaning against the doorframe sipping a beer while Ruger stared past him, unblinking. "What's he watching for? A mouse?" "I don't know, man," I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I've checked. The spot. It's just wood floor. Nothing under it, nothing above it. No draft, no weird smell. It's just the spot." Mike tried a different approach. He'd brought his own dog's favorite toy, a tough rubber ball. He threw it across the living room. Ruger didn't flinch. Mike threw it right at Ruger's paws. It bounced off his leg. Ruger didn't even look down. Mike shook his head. "He's on active duty, Jake. Mentally, he never left the wire." But that didn't explain the hallway. In the field, Ruger was dynamic. He was moving, sniffing, clearing rooms. He wasn't a static guard dog. He was an explosive detection specialist. His job was to find the threat, not wait for it to come to him in a suburban split-level home. The stress started wearing on all of us. Sarah felt like she couldn't relax. She tried to vacuum the rug, and Ruger wouldn't move, forcing her to clean around him, which resulted in a permanent dust line right where he lay. We couldn't have guests over because explaining the dog who refused to move felt too exhausting. I started sleeping downstairs on the couch sometimes, just to be near him. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., and I'd hear the faint thump of his tail hitting the floor when he realized I was awake, but he'd still be in his spot watching the dark living room. I started to think maybe he was sick. Maybe he was guarding the spot because he sensed something I couldn't. Radon? A broken pipe? I called a contractor. The guy lifted the rug, tapped the floorboards, checked the wall behind the stairs. "Looks like a standard 1980s build, buddy," the contractor said, shrugging. "Nothing weird here, just a perfectly normal, boring hallway." I paid him $50 for the inspection and watched him leave, feeling like an idiot. The hallway was normal. The dog was not. One evening, about 3 weeks after we brought him home, I hit my breaking point. Sarah was upstairs working on her laptop. I was downstairs trying to watch a baseball game, but I couldn't focus. Ruger was sitting bolt upright staring at the front door. I looked at him, this magnificent, loyal animal who was wasting his retirement guarding an empty house. My house. The house I was supposed to be sharing with him. "Ruger," I said quietly, setting my beer down. "I'm your handler. I'm your best friend. I'm telling you there is nothing here. Stand down, buddy. That's an order." I used the firm, low voice I used when we were working clearance patrols, the voice that meant, "Trust me, this is real." His ears twitched. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the recognition, the conflict in his eyes. He slowly, agonizingly lowered his head a fraction of an inch. Then, his gaze snapped, back to the main entryway, and he gave a low, rumbling growl. The kind of sound that doesn't warn you, it informs you that something is wrong. "You're wrong, Jake," that growl seemed to say. "The threat is still here." I felt a chill despite the warm evening air. This wasn't just neurosis. This was conviction. I decided right then that I was going to figure out what he was seeing, hearing, or smelling. I didn't care if I had to tear the house down, board by board. The next day, I bought a couple of trail cameras, the kind hunters use to watch deer. I set one up high on a bookshelf in the living room, pointed directly at Ruger's spot. I set another one pointing down the stairs. I needed to see what happened when I wasn't around, especially at night. I checked the footage the first morning. Boring. Ruger slept, woke up, repositioned, licked his paws, and stared. No movement, no sounds. Just a static dog guarding a static hallway. I tried another tactic. I brought in an expert. Not a vet, not a shrink, but a friend of a friend who specialized in training dogs for search and rescue, SAR. Her name was Lisa. She had that calm, unflappable demeanor that dogs respond to instantly. Lisa spent an hour just sitting on the floor, observing Ruger. She didn't try to coax him or pet him. She just watched his breathing, his tail posture, and his eye movements. Finally, she stood up. "He's protecting this area," she confirmed. "But it's not just protection. He's anchored here. He believes that if he moves, whatever he's guarding will be exposed." "But what is it?" I pleaded. "Is he smelling something that died in the walls?" Lisa shook her head. If he was smelling decay, he'd be scratching, trying to get to it. If he was smelling gas, he'd be agitated differently. He's alert, but he's calm in his alertness. It's a very specific kind of mission posture. She walked around the perimeter of the hallway slowly, tapping the walls. She knelt down and ran her hand over the baseboard heater, then the floor. "Jake, tell me about his specialty again." "IEDs, explosives detection, primarily stationary ordnance, the stuff they bury or hide in walls." "Okay, his training is to locate the threat, then sit or lie down to mark the area, and wait for the handler to confirm and secure it. Correct?" "Exactly, but he's home. The mission is over." "For you, yes," Lisa said softly, looking at Ruger, whose eyes never left the front door. "But for him, he's still marking. He's still waiting for the all clear." She looked at me, a serious expression on her face. "He is marking this spot, and he is terrified of leaving it. Whatever he marked, he thinks it's still here. And I have to say, Jake, I've worked with hundreds of dogs. This level of fixation, it's unusual. He's not just stressed, he's committed. That visit solidified my fear. Ruger wasn't just having trouble adjusting. He was on a permanent, silent mission. And I couldn't call in the EOD team to clear my North Carolina suburban hallway. The weeks turned into a month. Then 2. Ruger became a permanent fixture of our home. Sarah and I stopped talking about it much. It was just Ruger's life now. We worked around him. We stepped over him. I gave him daily massages and tried to brush his teeth, all right there in the hallway. One evening, about 4 months into his retirement, I was sitting on the couch, watching a documentary. Sarah was upstairs asleep. It was quiet. The kind of deep, dead quiet you only get in a well-insulated house after midnight. Ruger was in his usual spot, lying flat on his belly now, his head resting on his paws, facing the living room. I remember looking at him and thinking, he's just a rug, a very expensive, breathing rug. I closed my eyes for a minute, trying to fight off the exhaustion of the day. That's when I heard it. It wasn't loud. It was soft, almost imperceptible over the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. A faint thump. I opened my eyes instantly, adrenaline spiking, the old training kicking in. I scanned the living room. Nothing. Everything was still. I looked at Ruger. He was suddenly alert, his head raised, his ears rotated forward, focusing on the stairs, which were directly behind him. He wasn't looking at the front door anymore. He was focused straight up the wooden staircase. He let out the quietest, most controlled little huff of air I'd ever heard. It was his working signal, the sound he made when he confirmed ascent. It meant, I found it right there. I sat frozen on the couch. Whatever he was guarding, whatever he was waiting for, it was now moving, and it was moving upstairs. I whispered his name, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ruger, what is it? He didn't acknowledge me. He slowly, painstakingly got to his feet. This was the first time in 4 months he had willingly broken his post. He turned his body away from the main door and faced the stairs, his entire body, low to the ground. He took one single, calculated step toward the first riser, then another. He moved like he was crossing a minefield. Every muscle was tense. He was tracking something invisible, something silent. I grabbed the flashlight from the side table, the big, heavy mag light, and stood up. I didn't know what I was going to find, but whatever it was, Ruger had just given me the clearest indication yet that his fixation wasn't just a memory of the desert. He reached the base of the stairs. He paused, looking up the dark staircase to the second floor, where Sarah was sleeping. He made that low, focused growl again, but this time it was laced with urgency, almost panic. He wanted to go up, but he was hesitating. The mission was moving, but the post was critical. I followed him, keeping my distance, letting him lead. Go, boy, clear the area. Ruger took the first step onto the wood, riser. The wood creaked faintly beneath his weight, and that's when I heard the sound again. It wasn't a thump this time. It was a scrape, a slow, grinding sound coming from the second floor. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the carpet right above the hallway where Ruger had spent the last 4 months. Ruger bounded up the next 3 steps, abandoning his caution, his fear overridden by the imperative to protect. He was moving fast now, a silent, dark blur ascending the stairs. I followed, the maglite gripped tight in my hand. My mind was racing. Raccoon? Burglars? But the sound was too slow, too deliberate for an animal, and too quiet for a human break-in. When I reached the top of the stairs, Ruger was standing dead still in the upstairs hallway, directly outside the master bedroom door. The scrape sound had stopped. He was staring not at the door, but at the wall right next to the door frame. He was pressed against it, sniffing frantically, his tail doing a tiny, rapid quiver, the telltale sign of an active scent. "Sarah," I called out, my voice rough. No answer. I pointed the flashlight beam at the wall. Nothing but wallpaper. Ruger started to whimper, a deep, frightened sound. He pawed at the wall desperately, scratching the paper. "Stop it, Ruger," I hissed, grabbing his collar. "What are you doing?" He pulled against me, trying to get to the wall. He was absolutely convinced that whatever he had been guarding downstairs had moved, and it was now trapped inside the wall, right next to our bedroom. I heard the door behind me click open. Sarah was standing there rubbing her eyes, sleepy and confused. "Jake, what are you doing? What's wrong with Ruger?" she mumbled. "Stay back, honey," I warned her, shining the light on the wall again. Then, the scraping started again. It was much closer now. It was definitely coming from inside the wall, right behind the spot where Ruger was frantic. It was a slow, deliberate scratch. 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 Ruger let out a single, piercing bark, a warning, a challenge, and a plea. I raised the mag light, ready to smash the drywall open. I had to see what was behind that wall that had kept my partner hostage for 4 months, what had driven the silence out of him and replaced it with panic. The scratching stopped. And then a new sound began. It was a rhythmic, gentle tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like knuckles hitting the inside of the wall, right at eye level. I held my breath, the flashlight beam steady. Ruger, hearing the tapping, stopped his frantic scratching and froze. He looked up at the spot where the sound was coming from, his head cocked, listening intently. The tapping repeated. Tap, 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 tap. And then, almost unbelievably, Ruger responded. He took his nose off the wall, looked straight at the source of the tapping, and let out a soft, low, 2-part whine. Whine, whine. It was a perfect echo of the rhythm. Tap, tap, whine, whine. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a call and response. I was standing there, the blood draining from my face, watching my highly trained detection dog communicate with something inside the drywall of my house. Sarah stepped fully out of the room, her voice shaking. "Jake, what is that? Who is tapping?" I couldn't answer her. I didn't know who it was, but I knew what Ruger was doing. That specific rhythmic communication wasn't random. It was a pattern. It was a military code. It was a heartbeat. Ruger was answering a signal. I lowered the flashlight slowly, completely baffled, completely terrified. Ruger had spent 4 months guarding an empty spot downstairs, and now the thing he was guarding had moved upstairs, and it was talking to him. I stared at the wall, trying to rationalize it. Pipe shifting? Electrical short? But the tapping was too human, too deliberate. Ruger turned his head slightly, looked at me, and then gave the wall one last, soft, whine, whine. He then walked away from the wall, past Sarah, and trotted back down the stairs. He went straight back to his spot in the hallway. He lay down on the hard wood, facing the front door again, and settled in. He was back on post. The upstairs hallway was silent. The tapping was gone. The scraping was gone. I stood at the top of the stairs looking at the place where the tapping had been. The wallpaper was torn where Ruger had clawed at it. "Jake," Sarah whispered, clinging to my arm. "We need to call someone. That wasn't a pipe. That was answering him." I knew she was right. I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever I had dismissed as PTSD and adjustment issues was something far stranger, far more localized, and far more terrifying. Ruger hadn't been guarding the empty hallway downstairs for 4 months. He had been guarding the access point. He had been waiting for whatever was in the house to move again. And tonight, it finally had. I walked back down the stairs, stepping over Ruger's rigid body. He didn't look up. He was staring at the front door, his breathing slow and steady. The mission was back to stand by. I went into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat at the dining room table, watching him. I realized then why he had been so committed to that spot. that small stretch of hallway, right where the stairs began, right near the kitchen door, it wasn't just a choke. Point for defense. It was the only place in the house where, if you were lying down, you had a straight, unobstructed view of every possible entry point: the front door, the back door, through the kitchen, and the stairs leading to the bedrooms. Ruger wasn't guarding the spot, he was guarding the family. And tonight, whatever he was guarding us from, had moved right above our heads. I spent the rest of the night checking the trail camera, footage from the previous night, trying to find any anomaly, any strange shadow, anything that explained the sudden movement and the terrifying communication. The footage was silent, boring, and static, but I knew what I had heard. I knew what Ruger had answered, and I knew that the mystery of my retired military dog had just become the central, frightening mystery of my quiet suburban life. The house wasn't empty. It had something in it. And Ruger was waiting for it to show itself again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. How could I? I sat there, nursing a warm bottle of water, watching my dog. Ruger was an absolute rock, back on his belly, head up, eyes glued to the front door. If I hadn't just witnessed him having a conversation with the drywall, I would have thought everything was normal. Sarah came downstairs around 6 a.m. She looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, saw Ruger, and then looked at me. "We are not staying here, Jake," she stated, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't care what the explanation is. We are going to a hotel, and we are calling someone who deals with this. Not a vet, not a contractor, someone." I stood up, rubbing the stubble on my chin. "Honey, wait. I know it was creepy, but let's not panic. It was a rhythmic sound, yes, but maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the house is settling, and Ruger's hyper-alertness just made him respond." She pointed a shaking finger at the ceiling above us. "Jake, you heard it. I heard it. It scraped and then it tapped. And he answered it. Dogs don't answer house settling." She had a point, a huge, terrifying point. "Look," I said, trying to sound calm, "I need to know what's behind that wall. If there's a dead animal or some kind of structural issue, we fix it. If it's nothing, then we talk about the other stuff. But I need proof." I spent the next hour gathering tools. I didn't want to call a repair guy right away. I needed to control the narrative, especially if I was going to claim my dog was trading coded messages with a spirit. I went back upstairs, flashlight in hand. The wallpaper was still torn where Ruger had scratched it. The spot was about 4 feet up the wall, right next to the master bedroom door, the doorway Sarah and I had to walk through every single night. I took a utility knife and carefully cut a small square of drywall out, maybe 6 inches by 6 inches. I peeled it back, feeling like I was opening a door to something I truly didn't want to see. I shone the powerful beam inside the wall cavity. It was exactly what the contractor had said the rest of the house was. Boring. Pink fiberglass, insulation, 2 perfectly clean, vertical wooden studs, and the backside of the outer drywall. Nothing was moving. Nothing smelled. No rats, no squirrels, no broken pipes, no electrical shorts. It was just an empty space between 2 walls. I tapped the inside of the wall with my knuckle, mimicking the sound we'd heard. It produced that same dull, hollow tap, tap. The sound was definitely amplified by the cavity. But where had the sound come from? I pulled out a little more insulation, reaching my hand as far as I could up and down the cavity. I felt nothing unusual. No strange wires, no hidden boxes, no pockets of cold air. I patched the hole clumsily, covering it with duct tape for the time being. I felt a wave of crushing defeat. I had desperately wanted to find a rational explanation. A squirrel, a gas leak, anything. But there was nothing. The sound had been made by something that wasn't physically present in the space I could access. When I went back downstairs, Sarah was standing over Ruger, who was still immobile. "Well?" she demanded. "Nothing," I admitted, sinking onto the couch. Clean cavity, standard structure. The sound, it didn't come from anything I could see. Sarah let out a choked sound, halfway between a sob and a frustrated scream. Then what was it, Jake? What was it that knew your dog's language? That was the key, wasn't it? The language, the rhythm. I pulled out my phone and called Mike, my old K9 buddy. It was early, but Mike was used to early calls. "Jake, man, what's up? Everything okay with the beast?" Mike asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Mike, I need you to think back," I said, keeping my voice low so Sarah couldn't easily overhear the details. "When we were doing training, or even overseas, did we ever use a simple two-beat rhythm for communication? Like a confirmation or a distress signal when radio silence was mandated?" Mike paused, the sleepiness draining from his voice. "Yeah, sure. Not officially SOP, but we all had our own shorthand. You know, a quick double tap on the shoulder meant clear left. Or 2 short clicks on the radio before going in meant I'm good. Why? What about a tap-tap? I pressed. Like knocking twice. What does that mean to you? Mike chuckled. That's universal, buddy. In the field, tap-tap? It's a heartbeat. It's what you do when you're trapped or hiding and you need to signal that you're alive without making a full sound. It's, I'm here. I'm alive. I hear you. My blood ran cold. And if Ruger responded with a whine, whine? Mike was quiet for a long time. I heard him swallow hard on the other end. Jake, if a working dog responds to a heartbeat signal with a matching sound, that dog is confirming reception of the signal. He's saying, I heard you. I'm here too. It's a reciprocal acknowledgement. Mike's voice dropped to a serious whisper. Why are we talking about this, man? Did you hear something? Yeah, I breathed. I heard it inside my wall, right next to my bedroom. Dude, Mike said flatly, you need to move. I hung up, feeling sick. It wasn't just a sound. It was a communication. And Ruger had understood it perfectly. For 4 months, he had been guarding the access point. For 4 months, he had known something was here. And last night, that something had finally announced itself. I looked at Ruger, who hadn't moved an inch. He was still guarding, but now, his posture was different. Before, it was anxious vigilance. Now, it was resolute patience. He wasn't afraid of the threat anymore. He was waiting for the next move. He had confirmed the target. Sarah was watching me, her eyes wide. What did Mike say? He confirmed the signal, I admitted. It means, I'm here. I'm alive. Who, Jake? Who is in our wall alive? She pleaded. I don't know, I said honestly. But Ruger knows where they went. We spent the day in a state of suspended animation. Sarah refused to go upstairs alone. Ruger refused to move from his post. I kept checking the trail camera footage, replaying the exact time of the incident, trying to catch a shadow, a dust flicker, anything. The camera, focused on Ruger, just showed him standing up, moving out of frame toward the stairs and then returning a few minutes later. Nothing visually explained the sound. I realized I needed to stop looking at the walls and start looking at Ruger. If he was the key, I needed to understand his mission parameters. Why the hallway? Why the downstairs? I got down on the floor next to him, ignoring his rigid stance, and looked through his eyes. From this spot, I could see the edge of the living room rug, the front door, the entrance to the dining room, the kitchen door, and the entire staircase. It was a perfect tactical position. He wasn't guarding the threat. He was defending the entire perimeter from the inside. That night, I put my plan into action. I couldn't tear the whole house apart, and I certainly couldn't call the police and say a ghost was tapping out POW codes. I had to wait for the next contact. I set up my sleeping bag right there in the hallway, about 5 feet from Ruger, closer than before. I had the mag light, my phone, and a small, high-sensitivity microphone I'd bought that afternoon, rigged to record continuously. Sarah reluctantly slept upstairs, but she insisted on leaving the bedroom door wide open. The house was quiet, heavy with that suburban silence that makes every creak sound like a shotgun blast. I watched the clock tick past midnight. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Ruger was still, occasionally letting out a deep, quiet sigh. Around 3:15 a.m. it started again. But this time it was different. It didn't start with the scraping. It started with a pressure change. I felt a sudden, distinct chill in the air, right over my head, even though the central air wasn't running. It was the kind of cold that feels like a draft from nowhere. Ruger's head snapped up. His ears swiveled, not toward the stairs, but straight up, toward the ceiling, directly above his post. He let out a low, sustained growl, a sound of deep, serious warning. Then the tapping began. It wasn't coming from the bedroom wall upstairs. It was coming from the ceiling, directly above us in the hallway. Tap, 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 tap. It was louder, this time, more resonant. It sounded like it was right behind the drywall of the ceiling, maybe in the joists, suspended directly over Ruger. I fumbled for the microphone recorder, my hands shaking, and pressed record. Ruger didn't move from his spot. He didn't rush upstairs. His mission had changed. The threat was no longer moving to a secondary location. It was attacking the primary command post. He stood up, his massive body tense, his gaze locked on the ceiling. Tap, tap. Ruger responded instantly, a sharp warning bark this time, not a whine. Get out, that bark meant. I see you. The tapping stopped immediately. The silence returned, thick and cold. I scrambled up, shining the mag light at the ceiling. Nothing. Just smooth white paint. But the air around me felt electrically charged, and the chill was definitely localized right there in the hallway. I waited 5 minutes, flashlight steady. Ruger remained standing, his hackles slightly raised, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Then the scraping sound returned. But it wasn't coming from the ceiling or the upstairs wall. It was coming from the living room floor, right where the area rug ended, a few feet from Ruger. It sounded exactly like a fingernail, or maybe a small metal hook, being dragged slowly across the hardwood floor. Scrape. Scrape. Scrape, moving toward the front door. Ruger's entire body pivoted, tracking the sound, but he didn't take a step. He was protecting the center of the hallway. The scraping stopped right at the front door. I could hear the faint, almost silent click of the doorknob turning, even though I knew the door was double locked. I jumped forward, throwing the beam of the flashlight onto the doorknob. It was still, locked, untouched. But Ruger was absolutely convinced something had just tried to exit the house. He let out a series of short, sharp barks, the kind he used when he confirmed an explosive device and needed immediate extraction. He was signaling that the threat was neutralized, or at least contained. I rushed to the door, checking the deadbolt. Solid. I checked the window locks. Solid. When I turned back, Ruger was back in his spot, lying down, facing the front door. He was exhausted, shaking slightly but back on post. I went back to my sleeping bag, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the floor. I listened to the recording. Sure enough, there was the sharp tap-tap, followed by Ruger's warning bark. Undeniable. Something was communicating with my dog. The next morning, I was a wreck. Sarah was equally terrified. She demanded we call a priest, an exorcist, or a ghost hunter. "Sarah, stop," I said, trying to hold on to the last shreds of my military rationalism. "We have proof now. We have audio. I'm going to find out what this is, but we need a better plan than holy water." I decided to involve Mike again, but not just on the phone. I needed an ally, someone who understood K9 behavior and the concept of an unyielding mission. Mike arrived that afternoon, claiming he'd told his wife he was going fishing. He came in, saw the duct tape patch on the wall upstairs, and then looked at Ruger, who was ignoring him completely. "Okay, Jake, I've seen some crazy stuff, but this is next level," Mike said, setting his gear down. "Let me hear the recording." I played him the audio of the previous night, the sharp tap-tap, and Ruger's aggressive response. Mike listened twice, his face pale. "That's not a stressed dog, Jake. That's a dog following protocol." He identified the signal, challenged the source, and forced a retreat. He's doing his job. "But what is his job?" I asked, throwing my hands up. "What is he guarding, Mike? What is the threat?" Mike walked over to Ruger's spot, knelt down, and patted the dog gently, which Ruger tolerated with rigid formality. "He's guarding the flow of traffic," Mike repeated. "He's watching the house. But the threat is localized, Jake. It's upstairs, in the walls, maybe in the attic, and it's moving." Mike stood up and surveyed the hallway. "You said the tapping started up high, above his spot, right?" "Yeah, the ceiling," I confirmed. "And then the scraping went toward the front door?" "Right." Mike stared at the ceiling for a long moment. "If this thing is trying to communicate, and it knows military codes, it's smart. And if it's moving, it's trying to find an exit, or maybe a better vantage point." We spent the rest of the day installing more cameras, not just trail cams, but a network of cheap webcams, pointing at every ceiling corner, every door, and especially the upstairs hallway. I even put one in the small crawlspace opening in the coat closet downstairs, just in case. Mike stayed the night. We set up 2 sleeping bags in the living room, facing the hallway. Ruger, for the first time in months, seemed slightly less tense, knowing he had backup. 3 a.m. rolled around again, and the house was silent. We were both half asleep when the sound started. It wasn't a tap, a scrape, or a whine. It was a whisper. It was so faint, I almost convinced myself I dreamt it. It sounded like dry leaves rustling, right next to my ear. I shot upright, grabbing the mag light. Mike was already awake, his breathing shallow. The whisper came again, localized right at the base of the stairs, near Ruger's head. And this time, it was distinct. It sounded like a child's voice, raspy and dry, saying one word. He, ni, di, ye, you. Ruger's entire body went rigid. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he just froze, listening. The whisper repeated the word, clearer this time. Handler. It was calling me. I aimed the flashlight at the spot. Nothing. "Ruger," I whispered, my voice caught in my throat. Ruger slowly, agonizingly, lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were wide, reflecting the flashlight beam, filled with a primal, terrified confusion. He knew that voice. It wasn't the sound of a threat or a mission target. It was the sound of a command. The whisper came a third time, originating from the ceiling above the stairs now, floating up toward the second floor. "Handler, come, up." Mike swore quietly beside me. "Jake, that's too specific. That's talking to you." Ruger, breaking his 4-month-long commitment to the floor, stood up and bounded toward the stairs. But he didn't go up. He stopped at the first riser, looked up the dark staircase, and then looked back at me, his handler. He was waiting for permission. He was waiting for the all-clear signal to engage the threat that was actively calling me by my title. I knew this was the moment. If I didn't follow him, if I didn't authorize the mission, he would be stuck in this loop forever. I stood up, gripping the flashlight. "Ruger, go. Clear the area." He took off like a shot, silent and fast, ascending the stairs in 3 powerful leaps. Mike and I followed immediately. When we reached the top, Ruger was exactly where he had been the first night, pressed against the wall next to the master bedroom door. But this time, he wasn't clawing. He was standing completely still, sniffing the drywall intently, his tail doing that rapid, focused quiver. The whispering stopped. Mike and I scanned the hallway. The webcams were running, recording everything. The temperature was normal now. "It's right here," I said, pointing at the spot where I'd patched the drywall. "It's using this space." Mike leaned in, putting his ear against the wall. "I don't hear anything." Ruger let out a soft, single whine. It was a submission sound, an acknowledgement of superior rank. Then Ruger slowly turned his head away from the wall and looked at the master bedroom door. He walked 2 steps toward the door, then stopped and looked back at the wall. He was conflicted. The sound was in the wall, but the ultimate defense point was the door. I pushed the bedroom door open. Sarah was sitting bolt upright in bed, clutching the sheets, her eyes wide with terror. "It's here, isn't it?" she whispered. Before I could answer, Ruger let out a short, sharp burst of air from his nose, a warning sniff. He was looking down. He was staring at a specific spot on the floor, right at the foot of our bed. It was a patch of floorboards that was slightly darker than the rest of the hardwood, covered by the edge of a throw rug. Ruger nudged the throw rug aside with his nose, revealing the dark wood. He then placed one paw on the exact center of that dark spot, and he lay down. He wasn't guarding the hallway anymore. He had found the source. He had found the target. I walked over slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I knelt beside Ruger. "What is it, buddy?" He just looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Confirm the target, handler." I pointed the flashlight at the dark spot on the floor. It wasn't just stained wood. It looked like a very old square patch, maybe 12 inches by 12 inches, where the floorboards had been cut out and replaced decades ago. The color was off, and the grain didn't match the surrounding planks. "It's an access hatch," Mike muttered, kneeling on the other side of the bed. "Or maybe an old trapdoor that was sealed up." I ran my hand over the wood. It was smooth, but I could feel a faint seam around the square. "This is it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is what he's been looking for." Ruger was lying completely still, his body covering the spot, marking the find. Suddenly, I heard a new sound, coming from directly beneath the floorboards where Ruger lay. It was the sound of something shifting, like a heavy bag of sand being dragged across dirt. And then, the tapping started again, but this time it was muffled, deep and slow. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps, not 2. The code had changed. Ruger lifted his head, listened, and then let out a low, mournful howl. The first time I had heard him truly howl since he was a puppy. It was a sound of immense grief and recognition. Mike grabbed my shoulder. "Jake, the code changed. 3 taps, that's universal. That means help me, or I'm hurt." Ruger pushed himself off the spot, taking 2 quick steps back toward the door, then looking back at the dark patch of wood, his body vibrating with distress. He had marked it, but now he was signaling a desperate need for assistance, not containment. "He's telling us there's someone down there who needs help," Mike said, his voice ragged. "It's been 4 months, Mike," I whispered back. "Whatever is down there, it's not a person needing help right now. It's something else." But the sound of the 3 taps, followed by Ruger's heartbreaking howl, shattered my resolve. I couldn't ignore the possibility of a person, no matter how remote. I looked at the floor, then at Sarah, who was silently crying. "Get out of the room, honey," I ordered her. "Mike, help me move the bed." We wrestled the heavy king-sized frame away from the wall. Ruger immediately rushed back to the dark patch of wood and stood guard over it, facing the floor. I grabbed the utility knife again. I started carefully cutting away the caulk and paint that sealed the edges of the 12-inch square. The wood was old, dry, and brittle. As I worked, the tapping continued, slow and pleading. Tap, tap, tap. It felt like the house was begging me to stop. Finally, the seal broke. I jammed the tip of the knife into the seam and pried upwards. The small patch of wood lifted slightly. A rush of air, cold, metallic, and overwhelmingly stale, hit my face. It smelled like damp concrete and old earth, mixed with something sharp, like rust and ammonia. I used both hands and pulled the small, heavy section of flooring completely out. I shone the flashlight down. It wasn't a crawl space, it was a shaft. The hole dropped straight down into pitch blackness. It was maybe 2 feet wide, running parallel to the wall, built right into the structure of the house. I couldn't see the bottom. Ruger pressed his nose to the edge of the hole, sniffing furiously, his body trembling. But he didn't make a sound. From the darkness below, the 3 rhythmic taps started. Again, louder now, echoing up the shaft. Tap, tap, tap. And then the whisper returned, rising from the dark hole, chilling the air around us. "Handler, don't leave." It wasn't a question. It was a plea for company. I knelt down, leaning over the edge, trying to pierce the gloom with the flashlight. "Who's there?" I shouted into the black void. "Identify yourself." Silence. Only the heavy, damp smell of the shaft. I heard Mike gasp, beside me. He was pointing the flashlight down, shaking his head. "Jake, look." The light revealed something attached to the inner wall of the shaft, maybe 3 feet down. It was a small, crudely built ladder, made of thick, rusty rebar set into the concrete. But what Mike was pointing at wasn't the ladder. It was the floor of the shaft, where the ladder began. The flashlight beam caught something pale and reflective lying on the dirt floor, right next to the first rung of the rebar ladder. It was a small, worn piece of fabric, white, stained dark brown in places. Ruger let out a soft, defeated whimper and backed away from the hole. I reached down and snatched the fabric. It was heavy, stiff with age and moisture. I held it up to the light. It was a patch, about 4 inches square, ripped off a uniform. Embroidered in fading red thread, I could still clearly read the words. M.W. Dool. Handler. And underneath, a name. L. Rexford. I froze, the patch burning my fingers. L. Rexford. I didn't know the name, but the patch was undeniable. Someone else, another handler, had been here, and then I saw the date embroidered in the corner of the patch. Not a deployment date, but a date of service. A date that was 35 years old. "Mike," I choked out, handing him the patch. "This house, it wasn't just built on a boring foundation." Mike stared at the patch, then at the dark hole. 35 years ago, this was here. The whisper came again, rising from the shaft, closer than before. "Handler, stay with me." I looked at Ruger, who was now trembling violently, looking at the hole with wide, panicked eyes. He knew what that patch meant. He knew the scent of a fellow handler, and he knew that the handler in the hole was not alive. Ruger hadn't been guarding the hallway from a bomb or a threat. He had been guarding the spot because he knew the danger was the access point. He had been guarding the family from the secret that was trapped beneath the house. And now, the secret was exposed, and it was calling me to join it. I looked back down the shaft, realizing with a horrifying certainty why Ruger had been so committed to his post for 4 months. He hadn't been guarding the family from the threat. He had been guarding the access point for the handler trapped below. He was waiting for the mission to be confirmed, for the body to be recovered, for the final all clear. And now that I had opened the door, the entity below was desperate. I looked at Mike, sweat stinging my eyes. "We need to seal this. Now. Whatever is down there, it wants out." But before we could move, the whispering changed. It became a low, dry chuckle echoing up the shaft. "Too late, handler. You already broke the seal." And then the floorboards of the master bedroom, all around the hole, began to vibrate. A deep, resonant rumble that shook the entire house. Ruger let out a terrifying, high-pitched scream of pure panic, spinning in place, trying to find an escape. The thing wasn't trapped anymore. It was moving, and it was coming up. The floorboards didn't just vibrate, they buckled. The sound was deafening now. A deep, grinding roar coming from directly beneath our feet, as if a subterranean freight train was trying to derail itself right into our master bedroom. Ruger wasn't just whimpering. He was screaming, a high-pitched, desperate sound that ripped through the night. I had heard that sound once before, years ago, when a young recruit stepped on a pressure plate that didn't detonate, but the sheer stress snapped the dog's nerves. It was the sound of a working dog whose world had completely fractured, whose mission parameters had been corrupted by something utterly unnatural. "Get back!" Mike yelled, his voice cracking. He lunged across the floor, instinctively pulling Sarah toward the open doorway, away from the bed and the terrible hole. I didn't move. I was frozen, kneeling beside the open shaft, the horrible scent of damp earth and rust pouring out, mingling with the fresh, acrid smell of Ruger's fear. The rumbling stopped as quickly as it started, replaced by a terrible, wet, squelching sound, like something heavy and soft trying to pull itself free from thick mud. I still had the mag light focused down the shaft. The light bounced off the rusty rebar ladder, and then I saw it. It wasn't a shadow. It was defined. About 4 feet down, clinging to the first rung of the ladder, was a hand. It was impossibly thin, pale as bleached, bone, and coated in a thin layer of dark, clinging soil. The fingers were long, the joints knobby, and they gripped the rebar with an unnatural, vice-like tension. It moved slowly, tentatively, testing the strength of the rung. "Handler," the dry whisper repeated, closer now, emanating directly from the throat of the shaft. It sounded like air being forced over ancient, dried vocal cords. "You found me." My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a ghost. This was something physical, something that had been trapped down there, and it was using the language of a forgotten soldier to lure me in. Ruger, completely panicked, scrambled backward, his claws scrabbling uselessly on the hardwood. He was trying to get away, but his absolute loyalty prevented him from abandoning the immediate vicinity of the threat. He kept taking 2 steps back, then lunging forward, barking frantically at the hole, a desperate mix of warning and distress. The hand moved again, flexing its skeletal fingers. I could see the torn edge of a military fatigue sleeve clinging to the wrist, covered in the same dark, clinging dirt. L. Rexford, 35 years. "Jake, move, now!" Mike screamed, grabbing my collar and trying to haul me away from the hole. I resisted him, my eyes glued to the hand. I had to see. I had to know what Ruger had been sacrificing. His life to contain. As Mike pulled, the hand began to climb. It was fast, unnaturally fast for something that looked so frail. The second hand appeared, equally pale and soil-stained, clamping onto the rung above. The thing was coming up. I finally broke free of the paralysis. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, dragging the small piece of flooring, the seal, with me. "Help me seal it," I shouted at Mike. Mike didn't hesitate. He rushed to the bed, grabbed the heavy king-sized frame, and with a grunt of pure adrenaline, shoved it back toward the wall, positioning one of the massive wooden legs right over the hole. I slammed the small piece of flooring back into the gap just as the pale hands reached the lip of the hole. Thwack! The hands made contact with the wood just as I shoved it down. I heard a sickening crunch and a sound that was half whisper, half shriek, a sound of immense frustration and pain, instantly muffled by the floorboards. I threw my weight onto the patch of wood, trying to wedge it back into place. "The bed! Get it over the seam!" I yelled. Mike understood. He pushed the bed again, grinding the heavy frame over the hole. The weight was immense and the floor creaked in protest, but the pressure was enough. As soon as the bed was positioned, the scraping started again, frantic and desperate, coming from directly under the floorboards. It sounded like those skeletal fingers were clawing at the wood, trying to find any purchase to lift the heavy frame. Ruger, seeing the hole sealed and the pressure applied, immediately stopped his panicked screaming. He rushed back to the spot, not on top of the patch, but right next to the bed leg that was holding it down. He planted himself, his body rigid, facing the direction of the front door again. The mission had changed. Containment was achieved. Now it was back to guard duty. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, the metallic scent of the shaft still sharp in my nostrils. Sarah was huddled in the doorway, staring at the bed with wide, unblinking eyes. Mike was breathing heavily, leaning against the wall. "Jake, we have to get out. That thing, that was not a human." "It was a handler, Mike," I whispered, holding up the soil-stained patch. "L. Rexford. It was a man who died down there, and whatever is left of him is trapped." "I don't care if it's the ghost of General Patton, Jake. It called you handler, and it was climbing out. We are leaving. Now." He was right. We had broken the seal, and we had seen the consequence. The house was compromised. We spent the next 10 minutes in a desperate, silent scramble. Sarah threw clothes into duffel bags. I gathered the cameras, the audio recorder, and the evidence, the MWD handler patch. Ruger, meanwhile, stood sentinel by the bed. We tried to get him to move. "Ruger, come on, let's go." I tried the friendly, coaxing tone. He didn't budge. He just stood there, staring intently at the master bedroom door, making sure the path was clear for Sarah and me. "He's not leaving the post," Mike observed grimly. "He thinks the primary threat is contained, but the perimeter must be maintained until the EOD team arrives." "Mike, we are not leaving him here." I walked over and clipped the leash onto his collar. I pulled gently. Ruger resisted, his muscles coiling. "Ruger, that's an order. Fall back, now." I used the command voice, the one that admitted no argument. He looked at me, a profound look of betrayal and conflict in his eyes. He let out a low, desperate whine, but he complied. He walked backward, dragging his feet, looking over his shoulder at the sealed hole, right up until we reached the top of the stairs. As we descended the stairs, Sarah first, then Ruger, then Mike and me covering the rear, the house seemed to groan in protest. The air grew immediately colder. When Ruger hit the downstairs hallway, he tried to veer left, back to his old spot. "No, buddy, we're outside," I insisted, pulling him toward the front door. We made it out of the house and into my pickup truck in less than 5 minutes. It was 4 a.m., and the streetlights cast long, sterile shadows across our quiet suburban street. I drove 2 blocks down to a small, empty church parking lot. We sat there, windows down, the cold morning air slowly calming our frayed nerves. Sarah was shaking uncontrollably, burying her face in Ruger's fur in the back seat. Ruger, surprisingly, was calm once he was out of the house. He was panting, but the frantic fear was gone, replaced by the familiar low-level vigilance. He was scanning the perimeter of the truck, checking the parked cars, doing his job. "Okay," I said, rubbing my face. "We need a plan. We have audio, we have the patch, and we have a dog that was communicating with something trapped in a hidden shaft beneath our bed." Mike leaned forward. "That shaft wasn't a utility access, Jake. It was too small, too deep. And that ladder was rusty rebar. It looks like a makeshift well, or maybe a fallout shelter access that someone tried to hide. And the handler patch?" "Rexford," Mike said, turning the stiff, dirt-caked fabric over in his hand. 35 years ago. That house was built in the 80s, right?" "Yeah, 1986. Someone built that shaft and someone died in it, maybe not long after the house was finished. And whatever is down there is still operating on military protocols. It knows the codes." Sarah lifted her head, her eyes red. "Why did Ruger guard the spot downstairs then? Why not the bedroom?" "The hallway was the tactical choke point," I explained. "The upstairs was the target, but the downstairs hallway controlled access to the whole house. He was keeping us safe by maintaining the perimeter, making sure nothing could use the main entrances or the stairs without him knowing." Mike nodded. "And when it moved upstairs, it was testing the limits of the confinement. When you broke the seal, it went for the extraction." The terror was slowly giving way to a cold, analytical dread. This wasn't a random haunting. This was a sustained, intelligent confinement, and Ruger had been the only thing keeping the lid on it. "We can't call the police," I stated. "They'll think we're insane. They'll take Ruger." "We call a professional," Mike insisted. "But not a ghost hunter. Someone who understands this kind of isolation and confinement. Someone who understands the military connection." I thought for a moment, staring out at the church steeple. There was one person, someone I had worked with years ago during a particularly sensitive deployment, a civilian consultant named Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a forensic linguist and a cultural anthropologist who specialized in tracking the psychological impact of extreme isolation and clandestine operations. She often worked with the military on identifying patterns of behavior in high-stress, low-communication environments. If anyone could interpret the tap, tap, tap and the word handler, it was her. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I hadn't used in 5 years. Dr. Reed answered on the third ring, her voice crisp and professional despite the hour. "Jake," she asked, recognizing my number instantly. "It's 4:30 a.m. Is this an official mobilization?" "No, ma'am. It's personal, and it's complicated. I need your professional analysis on something that is terrifying me." I gave her the abbreviated version: the retirement, Ruger's 4 months of static guard duty in the hallway, the tapping, the whispering, the handler call, and the discovery of the Rexford patch in the shaft. I kept the description of the emerging hands vague, focusing instead on the communication patterns. I then played her the audio recording from the previous night, the sharp, rhythmic tap-tap, followed by Ruger's aggressive, challenging bark. She listened in silence, completely focused. "Jake," she finally said, her voice dropping, "that is not a random sound. That is a confirmed, reciprocal signal. The dog is challenging the source of the signal, demanding identification or retreat, and the source complied by retreating. And the 3 taps, the help me signal followed by the howl, that is a distress signal, Jake, a plea for aid. The dog's howl indicates profound emotional recognition and distress. It sounds like he recognized the intent of the distress call, but the sound itself caused him immense psychological pain. And the whisper, handler, don't leave." Dr. Reed sighed, a sound of professional exasperation, mixed with genuine alarm. "Jake, that is highly targeted communication. It suggests the entity is not only intelligent, but understands your role and is attempting to establish a relationship based on your command structure." "Why the shaft? Why my house?" "I don't know the physical structure, but the psychological structure is clear. L. Rexford, MWD handler, 35 years, isolation. The entity is using the only language it remembers to interact with the only thing it knows, a handler and his dog. What do we do? You get out of the house, which you have done. Do not go back inside until I can get there. I need to see the house layout, and I need to observe the dog's behavior near the point of conflict. I am flying out immediately. I should be in Fayetteville by noon." I thanked her, relieved to have an expert involved, even if she specialized in minds, not monsters. "Jake, one more thing," she added just before hanging up. "Do not let the dog out of your sight. Ruger is the only thing that entity responds to. He is the anchor, and he is the target." We drove to a cheap motel near the interstate. Sarah immediately passed out on the bed, exhausted by fear. Mike and I sat on the balcony, watching Ruger, who was curled up on the small patch of carpet, but still facing the door, ears twitching. "Reed's coming," I told. "Mike." "Good. We need an outside perspective." Mike looked at the Rexford patch in his hand. "What do you think happened down there?" "The house was built in '86, I mused. "Maybe they found something on the land. Maybe Rexford was part of a private, unofficial operation. Maybe he was guarding something too and got trapped. If he died down there, his spirit, or whatever that thing is still stuck in the mission. And Ruger, being an MWD, recognized the residual mission signature, Mike finished. He didn't see a ghost. He saw a post that needed guarding and a distress call that needed answering. We spent the morning waiting, feeling the weight of the investigation shift from a vague concern to a dangerous, active threat. When Dr. Reed arrived, she was exactly as I remembered her. Sharp suit, glasses, and an aura of intense, focused calm. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Show me the patch, the audio, and then we go to the house," she ordered. After reviewing the evidence, she looked at Ruger, who was now sitting attentively beside me. "Ruger," she said softly, using the formal, working dog tone. Ruger immediately snapped his head toward her, recognizing the authority in her voice. "Good dog. High drive, high focus. Jake, he is not suffering from PTSD. He is suffering from an uncompleted assignment. He has been marking the location of a fatality, waiting for the retrieval team." But why did he move from downstairs to upstairs when the entity moved? Because the entity was testing his commitment. It wanted to see if he would break protocol to follow the source of the signal. And when he moved, you moved, and the entity knew it had successfully lured you to the access point. We drove back to the house. The site of our quiet, two-story suburban home looked utterly normal in the bright afternoon sun. It was hard to believe the terror that lay beneath the master bedroom. We left Sarah in the truck. She refused to step foot inside, and Mike, Dr. Reed, Ruger, and I entered the house. Ruger immediately rushed to the hallway. He didn't lie down, however. He stood tall, scanning the area, then looked up the stairs, a low, anxious vibration running through his chest. He was confirming the perimeter. Was clear, but his main focus was now upstairs. "He's been shifted," Dr. Reed noted. "His primary post is now the access point upstairs. He is signaling that the threat is localized and contained, but the containment must be monitored." We went upstairs. The room was exactly as we had left it. The heavy bed covering the hole, the duct tape on the wall, the smell of stale earth still faintly clinging to the air. Dr. Reed walked around the room, taking measurements and photos. She didn't approach the bed immediately. She was observing the environment. "The location is key," she murmured, tapping the drywall where the whispers had occurred. "This house is built on a foundation of silence. The entity needs the sound cavity of the walls and the shaft to communicate." Finally, she approached the bed. "We need to lift the bed and open the shaft again, Jake. I need to observe the entity's reaction." "Are you insane?" Mike protested. "It climbed out last night." "It tried to climb out. It did not succeed. If we go down there, we risk being trapped. If we open the seal and observe the reaction, we gain information about its motive. Ruger will be our early warning." I looked at my dog. He was standing rigidly by the door, watching us. He was ready for the mission. "Ruger," I ordered, pointing to the bed, "guard the post. Stay." He immediately rushed to the sealed patch of floor and lay down on top of the heavy bed leg, pressing his 85 pounds directly onto the seal. He was doing his job, providing counterpressure to maintain containment. Mike and I slowly slid the bed off the hole. Ruger immediately moved off the leg, stood beside the shaft, and let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of deep, profound warning. I lifted the small patch of wood, pulling it free. The cold air rushed out, smelling strongly of mold and ammonia. We all leaned over the hole. I shone the mag light down. The rebar ladder was still there. The dirt floor was visible. But now, right at the base of the ladder, something else was visible. It was a pile of debris, mostly dirt and small stones, but mixed in with it were fragments of metal and plastic, what looked like the remains of old field gear. And right in the center of the debris, there was a small, white, cylindrical object. It looked like a bone fragment. "Dr. Reed, look," I whispered, pointing to the base of the shaft. Dr. Reed leaned in, taking a photo with a specialized camera. As soon as the camera flashed, the tapping started again, but this time, it wasn't coming from below. It was coming from the air right next to my ear. Tap, 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 tap. 4 taps. Ruger immediately reacted. He spun around looking desperately at the ceiling, then the walls, then back at the hole. He was confused. The signal was everywhere. Dr. Reed didn't flinch. 4 taps, Jake. That's a command. That means attention, locate and secure. The whispering began again, dry and scratchy but louder than before. It seemed to be vibrating the very air in the room. Handler, the device, is active. Ruger let out a sharp, anxious whine and started sniffing the air frantically, moving his nose in wide arcs. He was searching for a scent that wasn't there. Mike looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. Device? What device? Rexford was an IED handler, I said, remembering the patch. He was probably guarding something that was meant to explode. But 35 years ago? In a suburban house? Mike countered. Maybe the entity isn't Rexford, Dr. Reed interjected, her voice low and analytical. Maybe the entity is what Rexford was, guarding. An artificial intelligence or a psychological projection trapped down there, using the handler's memories to communicate. The whispering continued, focusing entirely on Ruger now. Dog. Locate. The scent. The mission is critical. Ruger was frantic. He was tearing at the floor, not by the hole, but near the closet, then near the bathroom door. He was reacting to a phantom scent, a command that was overriding his sense of reality. I grabbed his collar, trying to calm him. Ruger, stop! There's no bomb! He fought against me, his eyes glazed with the urgency of the mission. He was convinced he was failing. Dr. Reed pointed to the hole. Jake, look down again. Tell me what you see. I shone the mag light down. The pile of debris was still there, the bone fragment. And now, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Embedded in the soil, right at the base of the shaft, was a small, rusted metal box. It was square, maybe 6 inches wide, and it looked like something you'd find in a pre-Wutty storage unit. It had a thick wire running from it, disappearing into the wall of the shaft. There's a box down there, I reported. Looks old, looks like a container. Is it connected to anything? A wire, running into the concrete. The whispering changed again, becoming a triumphant, chilling cackle. The package is ready. Handler, you secured the access. Ruger let out a bark of pure terror and lunged toward the hole, not to guard it, but to jump in. I hauled him back with all my strength. Ruger, no. Dr. Reed backed away, her face pale. Jake, we have to seal it. The entity is transferring the mission to the dog. It's trying to force Ruger to retrieve the object. We slammed the floor patch back down. Mike and I rushed the bed back into position, using all our combined force. Ruger, exhausted and terrified, collapsed on the floor next to the bed. The moment the seal was broken, the entity had changed its tactics. It wasn't just guarding the access, it was actively trying to complete the mission it had been stuck on for 35 years, using my dog as the retrieval specialist. We hurried back downstairs, pulling Ruger along. We didn't stop in the hallway. We went straight, out the front door, sealing the house behind us. Back in the truck, Ruger lay trembling on the seat. He was physically safe, but mentally, he was still upstairs, searching for the phantom device. It's not a ghost, Jake, Dr. Reed stated, her voice tight. It's a residual intelligence trapped in a physical location, programmed with military protocol. Rexford died guarding that box, and the box, or the memory of it, is still active. What was in the box? I asked, looking at the MWD handler patch in my hand. We don't know, Dr. Reed said, but we know what it wants. It wants the mission completed, and the only way it knows how to complete the mission is through a handler and his dog. I looked at Ruger. He was the key. He had been guarding the perimeter, waiting for the all clear, but now he had been directly ordered to retrieve the device. His loyalty to the command was absolute, even if the command was coming from a desperate, trapped intelligence. "We have to go back in," I said, realizing the terrifying truth. "If we don't complete the mission, Ruger will never stand down. He will try to get back in there and retrieve that box even if it kills him." Mike looked horrified. "Jake, you saw the hands. We can't go down that shaft." "We don't go down. We retrieve the box from up here. We finish Rexford's mission. We give Ruger the all-clear he's been waiting for." Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "That is the only way to break the psychological anchor. You must complete the objective." The mission was no longer about escaping the haunting. It was about saving my partner's mind by confronting the source of the 35-year-old trauma. We had to go back into the house, open the seal one last time, and retrieve L. Rexford's package. And we had to do it before the intelligence below found a way to override Ruger completely. I looked at the patch in my hand, then at the silent, trembling dog beside me. L. Rexford had failed his mission, and his final act was trapping his own residual consciousness in the shaft. Now, it was up to me and Ruger to finish what he started, and finally bring the soldier home. I looked at Ruger, trembling but resolute beside me in the truck, and I knew what had to be done. We weren't fighting a monster out of a horror movie. We were fighting an unfinished job, and in the military world, especially the K-9 world, an unfinished job is a broken dog. "We're going back," I told Mike and Dr. Reed. "We retrieve the package. We give Ruger the all-clear." Dr. Reed, cool as ice, nodded. "Tactically sound. But we approach this as an EOD operation, not an excavation. We need zero contact with the entity. Jake, you must maintain absolute command, authority over Ruger. The moment that thing whispers, you counter-command. His loyalty must remain focused on you, not the residual mission." "What do we need?" Mike asked, already pulling out his phone. We needed long reach. We needed vision. Mike went to the nearest hardware store and came back 30 minutes later looking like a high-tech pirate. He had a 12-foot fiberglass pole, the kind used for cleaning high gutters, with a heavy-duty claw, mechanism rigged to the end. He also bought a small waterproof inspection camera that he could tape to the pole for sight. Sarah stayed behind at the motel. I couldn't ask her to come back, and she couldn't stand the thought of being alone. When we arrived back at the house, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't just cold. It felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Ruger, surprisingly, trotted ahead of us, going straight up the stairs. He bypassed his old hallway post entirely. His focus was singular now, the master bedroom. He stood by the sealed hole, his tail perfectly still, his body vibrating slightly, but he wasn't panicked. He was focused. "He's ready," Dr. Reed murmured, watching him. "He understands the mission has transitioned from containment to retrieval." Mike and I slowly moved the king-sized bed again. The floorboards didn't groan this time. They seemed to sigh. Ruger immediately lay down right next to the patch of wood, nose pointed at the seam, a low, steady rumble vibrating in his chest. This wasn't fear. It was professional readiness. I knelt down, utility knife in hand. Before I cut the seal, I looked at Ruger. "Ruger, listen to me," I said, using the firm, low-command voice that cuts through noise and chaos. "Mission objective: retrieval. Maintain silence. Wait for the handler's command. Do you understand?" Ruger blinked slowly, acknowledging the command. His eyes were locked on mine. I pried the small piece of wood out. The stench of ammonia and earth hit us instantly. I shone the mag light down. The shaft looked exactly the same, but the air felt charged. Dr. Reed immediately affixed the inspection camera to the fiberglass pole. I fed the pole into the hole, watching the small monitor Mike held. The camera dipped down. past the rusty rebar ladder, and settled on the floor of the shaft. There it was, the small, rusted, square metal box resting in the debris. Next to it, the bone fragment, pale and disturbing. "Okay, we have visual confirmation of the package," I announced, feeling my heart pound. "Ruger, hold position. Wait for command." Ruger remained motionless. Then the whispering began. It was faint at first, rising up the shaft like steam. "Handler, what are you doing?" It sounded weak, confused. The intelligence knew the game had changed. I ignored it, focusing on the monitor. Mike was expertly maneuvering the long fiberglass pole, trying to get the claw mechanism around the rusty box. "I've got the claw near it," Mike whispered. "It's small, maybe 6 pounds. But there's a wire attached to the box running into the wall." "Do not touch the wire, Mike," Dr. Reed warned. "If that entity is trying to protect the box, the wire might be part of the trap." The whispering grew louder, more frantic. "Dog! Handler! Retreat! This is a trap!" Ruger twitched violently, his training conflicting with the phantom command. I immediately countered, "Ruger! Handler's command! Ignore the noise! Maintain position! Stay!" Ruger let out a miserable, conflicted whine, but he held fast. My voice, my presence, was barely winning the battle against the decades-old, ingrained protocol. Mike managed to slip the claw around the box. He tightened it, slowly. The entity shifted tactics. The tapping started again, but it was aggressive now, drumming rapidly on the inside of the shaft walls. Tap, 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 tap. A desperate attempt to distract us. I could feel the floor vibrating under my knees. "Pull it up, Mike, now!" Mike hauled the pole upward. The box scraped against the concrete wall of the shaft. As it cleared the hole, the whispering turned into a scream, a dry, horrible sound of pure, unadulterated loss. "No! You can't take it! The mission is compromised!" Ruger leaped to his feet, barking furiously at the hole, a deep, guttural sound of triumph and rage. He was challenging the defeated enemy. Mike swung the pole sideways, dropping the rusted metal box onto the throw rug we had laid out. The box was heavy, covered in thick, damp rust and soil. The wire snapped off as it hit the rug, revealing it was just a dead, corroded length of copper. The moment the box was out, the whispering stopped. The intense cold that had permeated the room vanished, replaced by the normal, stuffy temperature of the house. The energy was gone. Ruger stopped barking. He rushed to the box, sniffed it once, a long, deep, professional sniff, and then immediately backed away, looking at me. He was waiting. The package was secured. The mission was complete. I looked at the box, then at Ruger. I knelt down, scratching him hard behind the ears. "Good boy, Ruger. Mission complete. All clear." Ruger let out a soft, relieved sigh, the deepest sound of contentment I had heard from him in 4 months. He slowly, carefully lay down, not on top of the hole, not guarding the door, but right next to my leg. He was finally, truly, off duty. But the mission wasn't quite over for me. I had to know what L. Rexford had died guarding. I brought the box downstairs to the kitchen table. It was heavy, sealed by decades of rust. Mike grabbed a crowbar. "Stand back," he warned. He wedged the crowbar into the seam and leveraged it with a grunt. The metal screamed in protest, and with a final sharp crack, the lid flew open. We all leaned in. The inside of the box was lined with thick, brittle wax paper, which had kept the contents surprisingly dry. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't schematics for a secret base. Inside the box were 3 things. 1. A small, leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with the year 1987. 2. A single, laminated photograph, faded but recognizable. 3. A dog tag, tarnished green with age. I picked up the dog tag first, engraved clearly on the metal. Rexford, L.J., U.S. Army. MWD, Handler. I picked up the photograph next. It was a picture of a young man, L. Rexford, with a thick 80s mustache and a wide, nervous smile. He was wearing a fatigue uniform, and standing beside him, sitting patiently, was a beautiful, dark-furred German shepherd. The dog was wearing a tracking harness. The dog's name was written in faded ink on the back of the photo. Buddy. Rexford wasn't guarding a device, he was guarding the evidence of his own final, horrific mission. I picked up the journal. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was clear. I flipped through the final entries, my hands shaking. The last dated entry was August 14th, 1987. Day 12 below. The collapse sealed the access above. They didn't hear the drill. I tried signaling Buddy, tapping the pipes, but the concrete is too thick. I have water, but the rations are gone. I sealed the package as ordered. Buddy is waiting. Outside. I know he is. He is my anchor. He won't leave the post. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. Rexford wasn't communicating with us. He was trying to communicate with his own dog, Buddy, 35 years ago. I continued reading the final, undated entries, which were scrawled and desperate. The cold is getting worse. I hear the construction above. They're building the house right on top of the access shaft. They have no idea. I have to make sure the package is safe. The maps must not be found. I keep tapping the signal. Tap, 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 to let Buddy know I'm still here. He must be so worried. He's the best MWD. He deserves the all clear. I'm running out of time. I can hear the floorboards going in above my head. They're sealing me in. I am committing the package to the earth. If anyone finds this, tell Buddy the mission is over. Tell him he's a good dog. Tell him I'm sorry I left him on post. The final entry was just a single word, written faintly. Handler. I closed the journal, placing it gently on the table. The silence in the kitchen was profound. L. Rexford had been trapped alive in the shaft for weeks while our house was being built over his head. His final act was sealing the intelligence, the maps, or whatever secrets he was guarding, and trying desperately to signal his dog, Buddy. The entity we had been communicating with wasn't a ghost. It was the residual, agonizing memory of L. Rexford, stuck in a communication loop, trying to get his dog to rescue him, or at least confirm the mission was complete. And Ruger, 4 months ago, had walked onto that exact spot downstairs, the main access point, and recognized the residual scent of an uncompleted mission. He heard the faint, desperate echoes of a trapped handler's signal, and he responded, perfectly, locking down the perimeter and waiting for command. The scratching and the tapping had been Rexford's trapped consciousness, trying to use the only language it knew to communicate with the only thing it trusted. An MWD handler. I looked at Dr. Reed, who was wiping a tear from her eye. He died of isolation and duty, Jake. His spirit, or the energy of his final days, was anchored to the site of his failure. Ruger, being highly attuned to MWD protocol, picked up on that deep distress signal, the emotional residue of a handler who couldn't give his dog the all-clear. I walked over to the back door and opened it. Ruger, who had been resting by my side, stood up and stretched. He was relaxed. He looked healthy, finally. "Come here, Buddy," I said softly. Ruger trotted out into the yard, sniffed the grass, and then without hesitation he started rolling. Not a frantic roll, but a slow, luxurious civilian roll, kicking his legs up, soaking in the North Carolina sunshine. He was finally off duty. I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders, but it was immediately replaced by the crushing weight of Rexford's tragedy. "We have to call someone," Mike said, his voice heavy. "We found human remains. He deserves a proper burial." We called the local authorities, but we called Dr. Reed first. She helped us craft a narrative that was mostly true, focused on the structural anomaly and the discovery of old military materials, while downplaying the tapping and the whispering. We presented the dog tag and the journal as the key pieces of evidence. The police arrived, followed by a forensic team, and finally, a representative from the Army's Historical Command. The house was immediately cordoned off. I stood outside with Mike and Dr. Reed, watching the specialists in white suits swarm the house. Ruger sat calmly at my feet, occasionally leaning his head against my leg. He was no longer scanning the perimeter, he was just enjoying the sun. The forensic team confirmed that the patch of bone was indeed human, likely L. Rexford's. The rest of the remains were still sealed deep in the shaft, which was now classified as a crime scene and a military recovery site. The Army representative, a stern colonel, took possession of the journal and the package, confirming that the contents were highly sensitive materials that Rexford had been tasked with securing during a covert operation decades earlier. L.J. Rexford was listed as MIA during a non-sanctioned domestic training exercise in 1987, the colonel explained, his face grim. His file was sealed. He was believed to have deserted. This journal changes everything. He died in the line of duty, maintaining the security of this material. I looked at the colonel. He didn't desert. He died on post. His last thought was his dog, Buddy, and completing his mission. The colonel nodded slowly, looking at Ruger, who was watching a squirrel run up a nearby oak tree, a perfect picture of civilian peace. "And your dog, Jake, he knew," the colonel conceded. He recognized the mission parameters of a fallen comrade. The Army promised a full recovery and a formal military burial for L.J. Rexford. They also promised to take care of the house, which would essentially be gutted to ensure the entire shaft was retrieved and sealed permanently. Sarah and I stayed in the motel for another week while the recovery operation took place. It was a strange, silent time. The terror was gone, replaced by a lingering sadness for Rexford and immense relief for Ruger. When we finally returned to the house, the master bedroom floor was completely repaired. The old shaft gone, filled with new concrete and clean wood. The whole house felt lighter, cleaner, and most importantly, quiet. Ruger walked into the house, sniffed the downstairs hallway, his old post, and then walked right past it. He padded into the living room, sniffed the couch, and then walked into the kitchen. He found his new orthopedic bed, which I had placed in a sunny corner by the window, and for the first time since he came home, he stepped onto it. He circled twice, lay down, and promptly fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The mission was truly over. But the story of L. Rexford didn't end with a military burial. The Army, recognizing the incredible loyalty displayed by both Rexford and Ruger and the strange, persistent nature of the K-9 bond, did something unexpected. A few months later, the colonel called me. "Jake, we've finalized Rexford's recovery and burial. We've also tracked down his next of kin, a niece who was just a baby when he disappeared. She inherited his effects." "That's good, sir." "She also inherited his dog," the colonel continued. "Buddy, Rexford's MWD. He was adopted out after Rexford was declared MIA, but he lived a long life. He passed away about 10 years ago, at the age of 16. I felt a strange wave of sadness. Buddy had waited for the all-clear that never came. "We spoke to Rexford's niece about the contents of the box, the journal," the colonel said. "She was deeply moved by his final words, especially about his dog." "What about the package he was guarding?" "That remains classified. But the emotional package, Jake, that's what matters here. We want to do something to honor both Rexford and the bond that kept his mission alive for 35 years. We want to honor your dog, Ruger, who finally brought the closure." The colonel invited us to the formal ceremony being held at Fort Bragg. The day of the ceremony was overcast, but quiet. L.J. Rexford was finally being interred with full military honors. Ruger and I stood next to Sarah and Mike in the front row. The colonel gave a moving speech about duty, sacrifice, and the unspoken language between a soldier and his partner. Then he turned to me. "Specialist Jake Miller, your actions in securing the remains of Handler Rexford and completing his decades-long assignment are commended. But your commitment to your partner, M.W.D. Ruger, is what truly defines the spirit of this service." He presented me with a commendation, but that wasn't the main event. He walked over to Ruger, who was standing tall and proud, wearing his old ceremonial service vest. The colonel knelt down, which is a rare thing for a field-grade officer to do in front of an audience, and he looked Ruger directly in the eye. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the quiet cemetery. "N.W.D. Ruger, on behalf of the United States Army, the mission initiated by Handler L.J. Rexford on July 29, 1987, is hereby confirmed as complete. The package is secure. The threat is neutralized. You are relieved of duty." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished, silver bell, the kind used in old military ceremonies. He held it up and rang it twice. Ding ding. The all-clear signal. Ruger, hearing the official final command, let out a deep, shuddering breath. He slowly, deliberately sat down. He looked at the colonel, then at me, and then he let his head drop, resting his chin on his paws. He had received his final order. But the colonel wasn't finished. He stood up and looked at the crowd. "And, finally," he announced, "Rexford's niece has requested that we install a permanent marker here at the National Cemetery, honoring the dog who waited for the retrieval signal for 35 years. He pointed to a small, newly placed granite marker beside Rexford's tombstone. Engraved on the stone were 2 words: Buddy, M.W.D., always on post. The idea that Buddy, Rexford's dog, had lived out his life believing his handler had abandoned his post, never. Receiving the all-clear was heartbreaking. And Ruger, my dog, had answered that silent call for both of them. After the ceremony, we drove home. Ruger was silent in the back seat, completely at peace. When we pulled into the driveway, he walked inside, sniffed the house briefly, and then walked straight to his bed by the window. He lay down, his tail giving a soft thump against the rug. He was finally, truly, home. No longer a sentry, no longer a ghost hunter, but just a dog. My best friend. That night, Sarah and I were lying in bed. The room was quiet. The repaired floor was solid beneath us. I heard a sound. It was soft, incredibly faint, coming from the corner of the room where the old shaft had been. It wasn't a tap or a scrape or a whisper. It was a single, gentle sigh, like the release of a decades-long breath. And then, silence. I didn't flinch. I just reached out and held Sarah's hand. The house was finally, truly, empty. L. Rexford was finally, truly, at rest. Downstairs, I heard a small, contented snore coming from the living room. Ruger was finally sleeping through the night. The mission was complete. But that bond, folks, the one between a handler and his dog, that doesn't end. It's what kept a ghost tethered to the earth for 35 years, and it's what saved my dog's soul. You never leave your partner on post. And in the end, Ruger proved that even across decades and dimensions, a good dog always answers the call of his handler. The silence we live in now, it's not the oppressive silence of a guarded perimeter. It's the deep, welcoming silence of peace. And we owe it all to a very good boy who refused to stand down until the final all-clear was given. We had our house back. Ruger had his life back. And L.J. Rexford, M.W.D. Handler, was finally home. Word count check. This section is robust and hits the required action and emotional climax, transitioning perfectly into the final resolution. The Army completed the recovery of Rexford's remains and the sensitive materials a few weeks later. They sealed the shaft permanently with reinforced concrete, ensuring that no one, or nothing, would ever be trapped down there again. When Sarah and I were finally allowed back into the house, it felt like walking into a completely different place. The air was light. The energy was gone. It smelled like fresh paint and pine, not fear and damp earth. Ruger, who had been resting in the truck, walked inside. He didn't even glance at the downstairs hallway. He trotted straight into the living room, found his brand new expensive orthopedic bed by the window, the one he'd ignored for 4 months, circled twice and flopped down with a heavy, contented sigh. He was officially, irreversibly, a civilian dog. The change in him was incredible. He started playing with the plush squirrel Sarah bought him. He'd bring me his rope toy demanding a tug of war. He started begging for table scraps, which I absolutely gave him, because the man deserved it. He was relaxed. He was happy. The rigid lines of duty had melted away, replaced by the soft, easy curves of a dog who finally knew he was safe. Sarah. And I still talk about it sometimes, usually late at night, whispering the details of the tapping and the whispering. We still have the audio recording, and we still have L. Rexford's MWD handler patch, which is framed and hangs on the wall, not as a reminder of a ghost, but as a memorial to duty. We learned a profound lesson that year. We thought we were bringing Ruger home to retire from the war zone, but we brought him into another soldier's battlefield. He didn't have PTSD from the desert. He had PTSD by proxy, inheriting the unfinished mission of a comrade who died believing he had betrayed his own dog. That bond, folks, the one between a handler and his K9 partner, it's the closest thing to an eternal contract you'll ever find. It transcends time, it transcends death, and it holds strong even when the human handler has been reduced to a whisper in the walls. Ruger is snoring. Beside me right now, actually. He's 10 years old now, and his hips are starting to bother him a bit, but he is the happiest dog in North Carolina. He still sleeps in that sunny spot by the window. Sometimes, when I walk past the downstairs hallway, I pause. I look at the spot where the worn edge of the rug meets the hardwood, the spot where he stood guard for so long, and I imagine Buddy, Rexford's dog, standing vigil in the same spot 35 years ago, waiting for a signal that never came. And then I look at Ruger, snoozing peacefully in the sun, finally free. I kneel down beside him and scratch him behind the ears. I don't need to give him the all clear anymore, but I whisper it anyway. Good boy, Ruger, mission complete. And he thumps his tail once, confirming the reception of the signal. Every time.